Hello, everyone. Let's talk about the civil rights to Black Power transition and both of the two movements. Both of them are both concepts and movements at the same time, civil rights and Black Power. As far as the civil rights movement, we're talking about redrawing the political landscape of the country. And it builds on the things that we discussed before. The civil rights movement builds on Reconstruction legislation and um, what marks the beginning of the civil rights movement is something that is it is a there's something of a debate there about what actually marks the beginning of the civil rights movement. um, it usually comes down to three events: Brown versus Board of Education, the case, the murder of Emmett Till, and or the Montgomery bus boycott. So typically, a person will cite one, or a scholar will cite one of those three or all three as markers of the beginning of the civil rights movement. So, as far as those significant events, Brown versus Board of Education took place in 1954, and it overturned the separate but equal um, ruling. And we've talked about that in this class. Homer Plessy versus Ferguson was the case that ruled that segregation was okay as long as it was separate but equal. Brown versus Board of Education overturned separate but equal, which put a legal end to segregation. So Brown versus Board of Education caused a legal end to segregation, particular focus on the on education, segregation in schooling. You know that through your study of The Road to Brown and the work of Charles Hamilton Houston, how this was accomplished, of course. However, what's not talked about in many cases is the negative impact of, could be unintentional or intentional, but the negative impact of Brown versus Board of Education was that the real problem with segregation and segregated schools was with the inferior resources that Black students had, and that affected the quality of their education. So Black schools had often had outdated books. Um, Black children had a lack of transportation to schools and inadequate school buildings and structures. The unintended consequences of Brown versus Board of Education is that many of those Black neighborhood and community schools were closed because the children were bused to predominantly white schools. So it caused the closing of Black schools, all Black schools across the country. Thousands of Black teachers lost their jobs after Brown versus Board of Education. Um, it caused a flight of highly trained um, white teachers from schools that were majority African American, and a loss of same race Black role models in the schools that black students attended. And Black students were being exposed to a culturally different style of teaching and learning. Okay, so that doesn't mean that we shouldn't celebrate Brown versus Board of Education, but when we talk about the access to education and high quality education and access to resources that Black students got as a result of Brown versus Board of Education, we also have to look at the downside uh, of Brown versus Board of Education and look at what we lost, or what Black people lost in terms of Black schools culturally culturally aligned teaching and learning, Black teachers, same race role models. So as you all remember, the architect of Brown versus Board of Education was Charles Hamilton Houston, which you know in detail, his work. We went over the unintended consequences of Brown versus Board of Education as well. And also it emboldened, it lit a fire under people who were committed to segregation to fight against it, to undermine Black children, even though they started to attend integrated schools. Then there was the murder of Emmett Till. Emmett Till was killed in Money, Mississippi. And he was killed in August 1955. So this takes place, of course, after Brown versus Board of Education, but he was lynched for whistling at a white woman in a store. Jet magazine published a picture of his mutilated corpse on the front page of the magazine. And the killing of Emmett Till was a way of touching people. It was a precursor to the racist images of brutality that we see on social media today and on mainstream media today. It inspired people to take action at a grassroots level, and it added a dimension to Brown versus Board of Education that was not there. Brown versus Board of Education meant the integration of schools. It ruled that segregated schools were harmful to Black students. And it made sense to people across the country who were proponents of integration. However, the murder of Emmett Till touched people's hearts. It drew empathy from people around the country when they saw what happened to Emmett Till. And let's watch a little bit of that.
Change began slowly, especially in rural areas. Blacks knew they could still lose their livelihood or their lives if they pushed whites too fast.
Step by step, the change began, first with small acts of personal courage. In September 1955, an old man named Mose Wright took that remarkable first step. His story starts at the Tallahatchie River in Money, Mississippi. Here, the body of Mose Wright's nephew, Emmett Till, was found, way down in the waters. Two local men were arrested and charged with the murder. They were white. Emmett Till was black. Till had come down from Chicago to visit his relatives.
This is Mose Wright. I am the uncle of Emmett Louis Till. Sunday morning, about 2:30, someone called at the door. And I said, "Who is it?" And he said, "This is Mr. Bryant. I want to talk with you and the boy." And when I opened the door, there was a man standing with a pistol in one hand and a flashlight in the other hand. And he asked me, did I have two boys there from Chicago? I told him I have. And he said, I want the boy that done all that talk. And they marched him to the car, and they asked someone there, was this is the right boy? And the answer was, yes. And they drove toward money.
And I found out about it 9:30 Sunday morning. I was in bed. I got up, called my mother when I got the news, because I had every decision I had ever made or every crack that I had ever been in, it took her to get me out of it. And I took that one to Mama, too, because I didn't know what to do. Mother told me to come right over, and she would start making calls. And I got over there as quickly as I could make it. And that wasn't very long.
By this time, everyone in Money knew what had happened. Emmett Till had broken one of segregation's rules. He talked fresh to a white woman in a store. He was only 14, he was a Northerner, and he didn't understand.
He went into the store to buy some candy. Before he went in, he had showed the boys around his age, he had some picture of some white kids that he had graduated from. That was, female and male. So he told the boys down there, hey, you got around the store? It must have been around about maybe 10 to 12, youngsters around there, that the girls was his girlfriend, So one of the local boys said, hey, there's a girl in that store there, so I bet you want to go in there and talk to her, So he went in there to, get some candy. So when he was leaving out the store, after buying the candy, he told us, say, bye, baby. And the next thing I knew, one of the boys came up to me and say, man, you got a crazy cousin. He just went in there and said bye to that white woman. And that's when this man I was playing checker with, this older man, I guess he must have been around about 60 or 70, he jumped straight up and said, boy, say, y'all about to get out of here, say, that lady come out of that store and blow y'all brains off.
Wednesday, the sheriff came and told me they had found the body at Phillip and wanted me to go and identify the body, which I did. And we found the body with didn't have on any clothes at all. The body was so badly damaged that we couldn't hardly just tell who he was. But he happened to have on a ring with his initials, and that cleared it up.
The body was shipped home, back north to Chicago, where Mamie Till Bradley insisted on an open casket funeral. So all the world can see, she said, what they did to my boy. Jet magazine showed Till's corpse, beaten, mutilated, shot through the head. A generation of black people would remember the horror of that photo.
No, for tomorrow.
I believe that the whole United States is mourning with me. And if the death of my son can mean something to the other unfortunate people all over the world, then for him to have died a hero would mean more to me than for him just to have died.
Roy Bryant, husband of the woman in the store, and J.W. Milam, her brother-in-law, were arrested for the murder of Emmett Till. The trial was held in nearby Sumner, Mississippi. Black organizations like the NAACP and the Black Press were especially interested, and they worked hard to keep the case in the news, to make an example of Southern racism for the world.
It was because it was a boy that they went there. They had to prove that they were superior. They had to prove it by taking away a 14-year-old boy. You know, it's in the virus, it's in the blood of the Mississippian. He can't help it.
I'd like for the NAACP or any colored organization anywhere to know that we are here giving all parties a free trial and intend to give a fair and impartial trial. And we don't need the help of the NAACP, and we don't intend for them to help us. We never have any trouble until some of our southern niggas go up north and the NAACP talks to them and they come back home.
I had covered the courts in many areas of this country, but the Till case was unbelievable. I mean, I just didn't get the sense of being in a courtroom. It was, first place, segregated. The black press sat at a bridge table far off from the court, and the boy's mother came down. They sat her there at the bridge table with us. Plus, the United States Congressman, at that time, Diggs, he came down, and I was the one that got him in because the sheriff wouldn't let him in. He said to the deputy that he called over, he said, "This nigga here said there's a nigga outside who says that he's a congressman and he has corresponded with the judge, and the judge had told him to come on down and he would let him in." He said, but the sheriff won't let him in, so he's sending his card up there. So this guy said, "A nigger congressman?" And he says, "That's what this nigga said." So I said, my God, I have never seen anything like this in my life.
There was, of course, a lot of buzzing when I entered the place and was placed in that area, and I think the judge said something about, yeah, have that boy come on up here and sit down over here with these news reporters, you know.
What do you intend to do here today?
To answer any questions that the attorneys might ask me to answer to the best.
How do you think you could possibly be a help to them?
I don't know. I mean, just by answering whatever questions that they ask me.
I see. Do you have any evidence bearing on this case?
I do know that this is my son.
The defense argued that the body found tied to the cotton gin fan in the river was so disfigured that it could not be identified as Emmett Till. The trial took 5 long, hot days. Because of threats to his life, the prosecution's star witness, Mose Wright, was kept hidden out of state.
Will you go back to Mississippi to testify in the kidnap trial?
Sure, I'll go back because I promised the sheriff I'll be back. And so if I live, I'm going back to testify. And after the trial, well, I'm through with Mississippi forever and ever. Didn't have my part in Mississippi. I'm through it. I don't want nothing else happen.
At the time, I really didn't realize how brave my grandfather Mose Wright was, you know. But after I got older, I realized that he was a brave man. He was a mighty brave man to travel back down there, you know, among all those hostile peoples and testify and get him up in court and point his finger at a white man and accuse him of murder.
He was called upon to testify as to could he see anybody in the courtroom, identify anybody in that courtroom that had come to his house that night and got the Emmett Till out. He stood up, and there was a tension in the courtroom, and he says in his broken language, "Dahi."
Dar he, there he is. Other black witnesses came forward too. Their courage made no difference in Sumner, Mississippi. As the trial ended, a defense lawyer told the jury he was, quote, "sure every last Anglo-Saxon one of you has the courage to free these men." It took the jury an hour to find the men not guilty.
How do you folks feel now that it's all over? Roy, how about you?
I'm just glad it's over with.
J.W.?
I am too.
Mrs. Bryant,
Feel fine.
how about you, Mrs. Milam? Did you expect this verdict?
Well, I was hoping for it.
Well, the whole trial was just a farce, but the verdict was the one that I had expected to be given.
Months later, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam told their story of the night of August 28th for $4,000 to reporter William Bradford Huey.
Milam was startled at the belligerent attitude, or the fact that young Till didn't appear to be afraid of it. Now, he'd gone and gotten him out of bed and had him in the back of a truck, and young Till never realized the danger he was in. I'm quite sure that he never thought these two men would kill him. And, or maybe he's just in such a strange environment, he just doesn't know what he's up against. And it seems, to a rational mind today, it seems impossible that they could have killed him. But J.W. Milam looked up at me and said, well, when he told me about this white girl he had, he says, my friend, that's what this war is about down here now. He says, that's what we got to fight to protect. And he says, I just looked at him and I said, boy, you ain't gonna never see the sun come up again.
Change.
So now, in addition to these two events we've talked about, Brown versus Board of Education, combined with the murder of Emmett Till, also set the stage for another event, the Montgomery bus boycott. And the Montgomery bus boycott has to begin with a discussion of the Women's Political Council and the NAACP in Montgomery, Alabama. Joanne Robinson, two key figures, Joanne Robinson of the Women's Political Council and also Mary Frances Burks. They asked for as early as 1946, they asked the mayor of Montgomery, Alabama for a law allowing Black people to sit in front of the public buses, and for Black people not to be asked to pay at the front and then go to the back of the bus. And also they asked that buses stop at all stops in Black neighborhoods. There was also E.D. Nixon. E.D. Nixon was the head of the local NAACP. And E.D. Nixon and the NAACP worked together with the Women's Political Council. Rosa Parks was also a member of the NAACP. And they worked together and had a plan to challenge Montgomery bus segregation policies. The movement itself rallied around Rosa Parks, okay? But there were several people who had been mistreated on the bus, on these public buses, that a movement was not fashioned around. For example, Claudette Colvin was refused a seat and at the front, and no movement was formed around her because she was not seen as a good symbol to organize around, given that she was unmarried and pregnant at 15. Uh, Louise Smith was also arrested, a Black woman, before Rosa Parks, but her father was smeared in the town as a drunk. And so it tells you a little bit about why Rosa Parks was chosen, because of the image of her image. As early as December 1st, 1955, Montgomery bus boycott, it took place. It established a model for change. It was an economic boycott. It was, the story is told that Rosa Parks was a woman who was refused a seat on a bus, and she refused to get up because she was tired. But this is a statement that paints Rosa Parks as just a typical woman who was at the end of her workday and was tired. But that's not the complete truth. She was not just tired. She had trained. She had been trained by the Women's Political Council, the NAACP, for years for a moment like this. The NAACP had laid out a strategy legally to challenge segregation using Montgomery as a test case. But the intention was not to stop at Montgomery. So December 1955, the Montgomery Improvement Association was formed to coordinate the mass movement in Montgomery, Alabama, and they selected Martin Luther King Jr. as the president. The base of operation was the Holt Street Baptist Church. And Martin Luther King articulated the goals and the ethics of the movement to the people in the church. He was chosen because of his charisma, his training, his PhD in theology, and because of his ability to articulate the movement. But later he became known for his leadership skills. He was chosen for his knowledge and his oratory and his ability to be a spokesman, but later he developed his leadership skills. And they organized the boycott using a door-to-door strategy. They made flyers. They organized alternative transportation. They carpooled with one another, and that lasted over a year. The boycott dealt an economic blow to the city of Montgomery. It took 65% of the bus company's business away. Meanwhile, the NAACP had taken the case to court. It went up to the Supreme Court, and in November 1956, the Supreme Court ordered an end to the boycott, and Montgomery agreed to also hire Black drivers. What this did was it established these three cases. They established the role of law in making change. They established the role of media in mobilizing and raising awareness. And they established the role of nonviolent direct action as a strategy to make change. And these strategies were used for the rest of the civil rights movement in order to make change. That's the significance of these three events that we've talked about. Martin Luther King became the leader of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. It was Martin Luther King who brought the church back to this social activist orientation, and ultimately the Black church gave inspiration and meaning to the goals of the civil rights movement. It was not, by far, it was not the only religion to inspire social activism, because when we talk about Black power, we have to talk about the role that the Nation of Islam played, Malcolm X played in inspiring and giving an ideology for the achievement of Black power. In this case, Christianity served as a rationale, a moral and ethical rationale for the civil rights movement in Montgomery. Now, there's some key aspects to Martin Luther King's social philosophy that are worth covering. King believed that Black people were on a divine mission of liberating themselves and their oppressors. So that meant that there was a divine sanction, a divine support for their struggle in Martin Luther King's thinking. In his thinking, Black people had the moral right and the responsibility to resist injustice. Because in his thinking, God's law is higher than people's laws. And there comes a time when a moral person can't obey laws that their conscience tells them are unjust. So King's belief was that Black people were exercising their citizenship to the fullness of its meaning. King also believed that it was immoral to collaborate in one's own oppression. He believed that silence was the voice of complicity, and this made being passive immoral. King also believed that religion had a social and a spiritual function, that religion is supposed to be a part of every aspect of a person. He also believed that humanity improved itself through struggle. It's not automatic that you have to struggle, that people have to struggle to improve humanity. Okay, this is King's social philosophy, and it landed King in a lot of trouble. King was named the most dangerous man in America by the FBI. And he had formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to take this strategy from Montgomery nationwide to organize grassroots direct action campaigns all over the country and train people in nonviolent protest with the aim of challenging segregation, fighting for equal opportunity, adequate housing, equal public accommodations. The SCLC added to the local mass movement. They added direct action tactics. And these were tactics that were different from the NAACP's primarily legal strategy. Okay? They complemented one another because making change in the courtroom was one strategy, but it also required direct action outside of the courtroom. This is a little bit about the boycott.
Alabama, when many stood together, the challenge would be strong. It started with a woman named Rosa Parks in Montgomery.
Montgomery in 1955 was a typical Southern city. We are called the cradle of the Confederacy. And there is a tradition in Montgomery of having carrying out the old Confederate South type of things, the stars and bars, flags. It was a totally segregated community. Department stores had white water fountains and colored water fountains. We had separate taxis. You had black taxis and you had white taxis.
And Montgomery, like all of the South, had segregated buses. In interstate buses like this one, and in city buses, the whites sat in the front, the blacks in back. If more whites got on, the blacks had to give them the middle and back seats too. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white passenger.
The front seats were occupied, and there one man, a white man, standing. And at this point, the driver asked us to stand up and let him have those seats. And when none of us moved at his first words, he said, "Y'all make it light on yourselves and let me have those seats." And when the policeman approached me, one of them spoke and asked me if the driver had asked me to stand. I said, yes. He said, "Why don't you stand up?" I said, "I don't think I should have to stand up." And I asked him, I said, "Why do you push us around?" He said, I do not know, but the law is a law and you're under arrest.
Mrs. Parks was formerly my secretary in NAACP in the local branch for about 12 years. She also worked with me when I was state president in NAACP. And she also assisted me in the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. And if there ever was a woman who was dedicated to the cause, Roselle Parks was that woman.
This was not the first time a black person had defied the bus segregation in Montgomery. It was not Mrs. Parks' first time. It was her first arrest. E.D. Nixon went to the police station to bail her out.
I said, Miss Parks, I said, with your permission, we can break down segregation on the bus with your case. I said, I'm convinced that we can do it. And I said, if I wasn't convinced, I wouldn't bother about it. She asked her mother what she thought about it. She said, I'll go along with Mr. Nixon. I asked her husband. He said, I'll support it. So that's fine.
E.D. Nixon and other black leaders called for a one-day bus boycott. In some cities, it would have been impossible to organize 40,000 people in 2 days. But Black Montgomery had a core of activists in the Women's Political Council, and they distributed these boycott notices all over the city.
I called every person who was in every school and every place where we had planned to be at that, have somebody at that school or wherever it was at a certain time, that I would be there with materials for them to disseminate. I didn't go to bed that night. I cut those stencils. I ran off 35,000 copies.
But the bus passed right down in front of my house, you know, and I got up to see it, and several buses passed. I was late for work because I was trying to see how many buses was empty, and they were totally empty.
The one-day boycott was a success. That night, a mobilized black community turned out for a meeting at the Holt Street Baptist Church and voted unanimously to continue the boycott.
The preachers were preaching as I came in. I was about 2 minutes late coming in, and they were preaching, and that audience was so on fire that the preacher would get up and say, "Do you want your freedom?" And they'd say, "Yeah, well, I want my freedom. Are you for what we're doing?" "Yeah, go ahead, go ahead."
Overwhelmingly, I don't know if there was one vote that said, no, don't continue. The people wanted to continue that boycott. They had been touched by the persecution, the humiliation that many of them had endured on buses, and they voted for it unanimously, and that meant thousands of people.
You see, when I first started fighting, I was fighting to keep so that the children who came behind me wouldn't suffer the same thing I suffered. Then the night of the bus boycott on December the 5th, I told the people that I had been fighting like that for all these years. I said, the night I changed my mind, I said, hell, I want to enjoy some of this stuff myself. And man, you ought to heard people holler.
The keynote speaker at Holt Street Church was a new preacher in town, Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. He was only 26 and was almost unknown outside his own congregation. King wasn't sure he should accept when his fellow ministers and other leaders asked him to head the new Montgomery Improvement Association and the boycott. But they wanted him in part because he was new in Montgomery.
Reverend King was a young man, very intelligent young man. He had not been here long enough for the city fathers to put their hand on him.
Martin said, well, you know, I'm not sure I'm the best person for this position since I'm new in the community. And but if no one else is going to serve, you know, someone has to do it, and I'd be glad to try to do it. And of course, I guess everybody then assured him they wanted him. So he came home very excited about the fact that he had to give the keynote speech that night at mass meeting. He only had 20 minutes to prepare his speech.
We, the disinherited of this land, we who have been oppressed so long, are tired of going through the long night of captivity. And now we are reaching out for the daybreak of freedom and justice and equality. The only weapon that we have in our hands this evening is the weapon of protest. That's all. And certainly this is the glory of America with all of its faults. And we are not wrong. We are not wrong in what we are doing. If we are wrong, the Supreme Court of this nation is wrong. If we are wrong, the Constitution of the United States is wrong. If we are wrong, God Almighty is wrong.
We have never seen a crowd like that before. It took 15 minutes before the people would sit down and become quiet and let us begin the meeting. And I can tell you the name of the first song that we sang. It was What a Fellowship, What a Joy Divine, Leaning on the Everlasting Arms.
Before the boycott, 2/3 of the bus riders were black. After December 5th, there were almost no blacks at the segregated bus stops or on the buses. They walked, and they created a complex system that used private cars to carry thousands of people each day.
We asked for persons who had cars and would voluntarily put them in the transportation pool to let us know and what time they could be used. And in that way, we could know when we would have cars and where they had to go to pick up people. People would call in and say, I'm out here on Cloverdale Road in such and such a block, and I'll be ready at such and such a time. But this was being done all through the day, and we would know what time they were supposed to be picked up and where they were.
It was really surprising because we thought, well, maybe some of the people would continue to ride the bus. But after all, they had been mistreated and been mistreated in so many different ways until I guess they were tired and they just decided that they just wouldn't ride.
The black community was inspired by its own success. They held meetings with the mayor and the bus company and found they could stand up to the city commissioners.
At first, we didn't even ask for desegregation. We only asked for a more humane system of segregation on the buses. And when the opposition refused to grant that, then we realized that they wouldn't grant anything anyway, so we might as well ask for, complete desegregation. And that's what we went for, and we realized we had to go for broke, so to speak.
By this time, the boycott had lasted longer than anyone expected. A wave of violence started. Shots fired at buses. Bombs thrown at Martin King's home and Edie Nixon's home.
You've had some rather personal and trying experiences yourself. Are you afraid?
No, I'm not. My attitude is that this is a great cause. It is a great issue that we are confronted with, and that the consequences for my personal life are not particularly important. It is the triumph of the cause that I'm concerned about. And I have always felt that ultimately along the way of life, an individual must stand up and be counted and be willing to face the consequences, whatever they are. And if he is filled with fear, he cannot do it.
We thought that you could just shame America. So now, America, look at your promises and look at how you're treating your poor Negro citizens. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. But segregate, you can't shame segregation. You can't, rattlesnakes don't commit suicide. Ball teams don't strike themselves out. You got to put them out.
The nightly mass meetings in church were the backbone of the boycott.
The mass meetings usually were attended by the maids and cooks and janitors and people who really used the buses a lot, and they would be there singing and praying for hours sometimes before the program actually started, the main part of the mass meeting.
I attended just about all of them. It was really very interested in it because you could go and you could learn about so many things that you didn't know exist, and so many people would tell you how they were being mistreated, and they were glad that they were able to come up and not have to take the same treatments that they had taken and was afraid to admit.
The fear left. The fear that had shackled us across the years all left suddenly when we were in that church together.
Dr. Abernathy would speak first, usually, and he had the ability to really make them laugh and maybe make them cry some. He really knew how to, kind of get them in the mood.
This show is your show. Not only is this show the show of Negroes in Montgomery, but this is the show of Negroes all over America. And then I want to go a little further than that and tell you that truly this show is the show of all freedom-loving people all over the world.
I guess you'd call it a kind of folksy quality. He was able to do that because that was a part of his style. Whereas with Martin, he was more, I guess, what you would consider formal, and he would come along with a very thoughtful message.
Let me urge you to be sane and rational. Eventually, segregation in public transportation will pass away. Eventually. And I think we should start now preparing for the inevitable. And let us, when that moment comes, go into the situations that we confront with a great deal of dignity, sanity, and reasonableness.
It's very hard for an ordinary person to describe Reverend King's speaking ability because he was such an outstanding man. He could make you feel what he was saying as well as hearing what he was saying. He was sincere and dedicated, and he could lift you out your seat. You couldn't just be quiet, look like. It was such a stirring thing that it would affect you. It just go right through you. So I can't say much more than that, but because it is such a stimulating thing. And he was carried away, look like, with his own speech.
Dr. King spoke with a new voice. Not only was it a new movement, but it was a new voice that you must love. You must not hate the people who hate or who act like they hate you. You must, and the best thing to make out of your enemy is a friend. So this had a very profound effect upon not only blacks, but whites at this time.
You are not going to permit the NAACP to control your state.
As the boycott entered its second month, the white community's position hardened. There were whites who were sympathetic to the boycott, but many more were not. A segregationist group called the White Citizens Council held huge rallies and vastly increased its membership, becoming the largest organization in white Montgomery. They targeted anyone, black or white, who supported desegregation.
90% of the white people in Alabama are for segregation, but in the last few years we have had a quite a number of backsliders, you might say, that for political reasons, to further their political ambitions, have been trying to garner the Negro vote and would do most anything to get that vote. The Citizens Council is out to utterly destroy those people.
The thing that kept the whites going was segregation, was the old way. Don't break the old way. Don't break this fabric. Don't break down segregation. Don't take this away, this old South. Don't take back the things that we've always known, and that we fought a war over these things, and that our forefathers would have us do this.
Despite the pressure, the buses remained empty. The black leaders decided the boycott might weaken if they didn't respond quickly to the violence. They filed suit in federal court, claiming that bus segregation was unconstitutional. White officials retaliated by indicting almost 90 black leaders under an old anti-boycott law. The tactic backfired. Suddenly, the national press was very interested in the story, and in the eloquent Martin Luther King Jr.
We still feel that we are right and that we stand within our constitutional rights in the protest. We still advocate nonviolence, passive resistance, and still determined to use the weapon of love.
Jesus is with me. Oh, yeah.
Armed with the weapon of nonviolent resistance, Montgomery's blacks kept walking, month after month after month.
When I need him more, and I've gone to my extreme, all my working, baby, see, then she lost that.
How many miles do you think you walked?
Oh, about 7 or 8 miles a day, maybe long further than that, because, you know, going and coming, it made a great deal distant.
Ever tempted to take a ride from?
No, no, but if sometime we would be out on the road coming home, well, it'd be a white lady come along and pick us up and carry us so far, and we would thank her for it. We would be very glad, and we would offer her pay, but she wouldn't take it.
The strange thing that happened was a kind of a play between white women and black women. The mayor of the town issued an order saying if the white women would just stop carrying their maids back and forth, that the boycott would be ended. And so, I don't say all of them, but some of them replied and said, well, if he wants to come out and do my cooking and laundry and nurse the children and clean up, he can. So the white women went and got them in the car. They said they did it because the bus had broken down. Any excuse you could possibly think of.
I would have to say that there were many sympathetic whites who knew that the system was wrong, and they were doing what they could to help to correct it.
Oh, Jesus is with me. Oh, yeah. When I need him more, Jesus is with me. Jesus is with me. Oh, yeah. When I need him more.
Well, you know, a lot of times some of the young whites would come along and they would say, nigger, don't you know it's better to ride the bus than it is to walk? And we would say, no, cracker, no, we were to walk.
April 1956. The boycott was 4 months old. In other states, lawsuits and black pressure were breaking down bus segregation, but not in Alabama.
We expect the city bus lines of Montgomery and the people of Montgomery to continue to obey all segregation laws as written. I have this day issued orders to the chief of police and the police department to continue to make arrests in all violations with reference to the segregation laws.
several southern cities, including Richmond, Virginia, Little Rock, Arkansas, Dallas, Texas, and others have ended segregation on city buses, and white and Negro passengers rode together on front seats without incident, mishaps, or disturbances. The public officials of the city of Montgomery and the state of Alabama intend to obey the segregation laws of the city of Montgomery, and we, the Negro citizens of Montgomery, Alabama, do now and will continue to carry on our mass protest.
June 1956, 6 months. There had been boycotts before, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 3 years before, even in Montgomery itself, 50 years before. None had lasted so long with so much support. In Tallahassee, Florida, another boycott started. It was so effective that the bus company was forced to shut down operations. It was clear the boycotts hurt the bus companies, businesses, and the cities. It was not clear if they could end segregation. September 1956, 9 months. The Klan in Montgomery held a series of highly visible rallies.
They want to throw white children and colored children into the melting pot of integration, out of which will come a conglomerated, mulatto, mongrel class of people. Both races will be destroyed in such a movement in a matter of time.
Many in the black community were frightened, but they kept walking. 10 months, 11 months. The boycott's second Christmas was approaching. Downtown stores were hurt, but neither the city nor the marchers would compromise. On November 13, 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court broke the deadlock, ruling unanimously that Montgomery's bus segregation was unconstitutional. That day, the Ku Klux Klan rode and walked the black neighborhoods again. This time, the blacks just watched, unmoved and unafraid.
The decision rendered by the Supreme Court yesterday was a victory. Yeah. But it wasn't a victory for colored folks. Don't make that victory that small. It wasn't a victory for 50,000 Negroes of Montgomery. It wasn't merely a victory for 16 million Negroes of America. That was a victory for justice and goodwill. Now, what will be our mode of action in the light of this decision? After thinking through this question very seriously, the Executive Board of the Montgomery Improvement Association recommends that the 11-month-old protest against the city buses will be called off, and that the Negro citizens of Montgomery, Alabama will return to the buses on a non-segregated basis. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, let it be known by standing on your feet. It seems that it is carried unanimously.
Because you get to understand that God is with you, that God can take care of you, and that this is God's way, and you are there to do it. And I think that's a sense of drive. That's what many people don't understand about what happened back in the Deep South. That here I am, that this is my duty. I've got to do something. And God is with me. And if God is with me, how can you lose leaning on the everlasting arm?
Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. To
boycott was over, the people, the blacks got on the bus to sit on the front seat just to show off. And they had a lot of fun sitting on the front seat, riding to the college or riding away from the college. Nobody sat in the back then because all of them sat on the front. It was a jubilation. It was a joy.
Oh, 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 what a beautiful. Ooh, ah, ooh. Oh, Lord, what a beautiful city. To gate to the city. Hallelujah.
We had won self-respect. We had forced the white man to give what we knew was a part of our own citizenship, and so we had won that. And if you have never had the feeling to feel that this is not the other man's country and you are an alien in it, but that this is your country too, then you don't know what I'm talking about. But it is a hilarious feeling that just goes all over you, that makes you feel that America is a great country and we're going to do more to make it greater.
So I want to talk about a shift in focus from the Montgomery bus boycott. In Little Rock, Arkansas, there's the story of the Little Rock Nine, who you all read about in the book. One of the goals of the Civil Rights Movement was to expose the contradictions of America in the eyes of the world. And Little Rock Nine, as far as the Little Rock Nine, there was Governor Faubus in Arkansas. And Faubus had sent the National Guard to prevent Black children from attending school. And he was ordered not to prevent them by the president. And he removed the troops that were provided to protect the students. And the President Eisenhower at the time, sent troopers, federal paratroopers, in order to protect the children. These are the kinds of events that were taking place to force integration. James Meredith, very similar case. James Meredith was attending Ole Miss, and George Wallace tried to prevent him. Governor Ross Barnett vowed to prevent him as well. Kennedy sent federal troopers to protect James Meredith. And Kennedy then pressed Martin Luther King to focus on voter registration instead of direct action. So there was some conflict between the president and Martin Luther King. The president would have preferred Martin Luther King to not focus so much on nonviolent direct action, not focus so much on bringing attention to issues like James Meredith's attending Ole Miss. He wanted him to focus on voter registration because he felt that focusing on voter registration was safer. Instead, Martin Luther King focused on both voter registration and nonviolent direct action. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was organized by the SCLC member Ella Baker, who was a brilliant organizer. She was able to capture the sentiment of the time. She was able to understand the situational needs of Black organizing, and she advocated for decentralized leadership tactics. She had gotten students together in a conference at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, at a conference. It was attended by students all over the country. And she talked to them about the importance of decentralized leadership. This decentralized leadership is a precursor to some of the decentralized leadership that we see today or that we see in the form of organizations like Black Lives Matter. In 1960, there were 4 students in North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College, North Carolina A&T, and they decided to integrate public facilities, focusing on restaurants, replicated in Atlanta University, and students were directed to public facilities like these restaurants that were segregated. They engaged in boycotts. They did sit-ins. The students in North Carolina A&T desegregated local restaurants by sitting at segregated lunch counters at local Woolworths. The sit-ins led to what was known as freedom rides. And these freedom rides involved Black people as well as their allies getting on buses and traveling across state lines into states in the South. And what they did was they forced the enforcement of integration in travel, interstate travel. They also engaged in voter registration campaigns and political party building. In 1960, President Kennedy gained Black people's favor by using his political influence to get Martin Luther King out of jail in Atlanta, which helped him get elected, frankly. President Kennedy passed the Executive Order 11063, which banned discrimination in federal housing and established the EEOC, which banned discrimination in the federal government. So the President Kennedy and Martin Luther King had an ongoing relationship. It's just that Kennedy would prefer Martin Luther King not to engage in the kinds of activism that were about desegregating economic organizing and the kinds of things that upset Kennedy's Southern constituents most. Now, in 1961, CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, they started what I just mentioned not long ago as the Freedom Rides in order to challenge segregation in interstate travel. And what they did was they traveled into these southern cities, and when they traveled into southern city, they were attacked on these buses. And what it did was it drew again national attention, international media of whites attacking Black people who were simply trying to ride on buses across state lines and into the South. And it caused the federal government to have to enforce integrated interstate travel. I think it's important to mention that these freedoms rides, the Interstate Commerce Commission had a ruling. The freedom rides by Congress of Racial Equality and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee were actually beaten in South Carolina because their bus was firebombed. It was firebombed in Anniston, Alabama, and they were beaten again in Montgomery, Alabama. Many of the riders abandoned the ride because it was too dangerous. It was a test. It was a test to test the federal protection of integration. So the violence attracted, again, international attention, more so than any other previous movement, and it forced the federal government to take action and send protection. The ultimate purpose of those freedom rides was to test the U.S. federal government's willingness to protect the rights of African Americans in interstate travel. And I think it brings up a really important point when it comes to the civil rights and laws in general, back then and as well as today, that laws can be undermined by lack of enforcement. You can have a very equitable law beautifully written, democratic, but if it's not enforced, or if it's enforced unequally, then the law is undermined. And that's what they were fighting against. The focus shifts in 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham, Alabama had a police commissioner named Bull Connor. He was known as a particularly aggressive and violent police chief. And Black people wanted to have businesses that hired Blacks. They wanted fair housing and they wanted integrated schools. So there were things on the agenda in Alabama that were different from just desegregation. Their objectives were becoming more economic. This is the kind of thing that the president wanted Martin Luther King to stay away from. So the focus shifts in Alabama here. In Alabama, you had politicized Black people and whites who were outside of the political system. There was the creation of this nonviolent student coordination committee, which were younger Black people who were organizers. And this Alabama struggle laid the foundation for future political struggle. It laid the foundation for the nationalist movements that followed. Now, why was Birmingham, Alabama chosen as the site for SCLC direct action?
Alabama.
Direct action. Why was it chosen? Because the Blacks in the city faced police brutality, economic, educational, and social discrimination. Also, the Ku Klux Klan was rampant in Montgomery, Alabama. So Martin Luther King had organized a protest that demanded employment, opportunities, desegregated schools, low-income housing, and improved services, an array of things that the movement had not been focused on previously. But the police chief had a violent reputation. This is Bull Connor I'm referring to. The protest ensued, they were quickly arrested, and King writes his famous letter from a Birmingham jail. Beautifully written letter from a Birmingham jail. I suggest that you all read it. Many objected to the approach of using children in this march. This is they're iconic scenes that you all may have seen before of Black people being chased with police dogs and with fire hoses being sprayed at Black children. That's from this particular movement. So they started this children's crusade, and the children were let out of school to protest. And Bull Connor, the police chief, used dogs and nightsticks and water hoses on those children too. And Birmingham agreed to integrate under the pressure from businesses. So it was successful in that sense.
Until the courts could decide which city government was the legal one, Bull Connor remained in charge of the police and fire departments. And Connor took a lesson from Laurie Pritchett, showing restraint as he supervised the arrest of hundreds of demonstrators. It was a week and a half before Easter. As planned, the demonstrations affected business during a major shopping season. Merchants and community leaders were upset.
We've got some mighty good people in this community, both white and colored.
Businessman A.G. Gaston supported the new administration.
We didn't anticipate the need for Martin King at that time. This Martin King thing came, and all of a sudden.
I was upset with Dr. King because he wouldn't give us a chance to prove what we could do through the political processes. And a year and a day after Connor had been elected with the largest vote in history, a majority of the people of this city voted to terminate his office. And when we ran for mayor, they rejected him.
I believe a representative of my office at the Department of Justice.
The federal government also thought the protests were ill-timed.
Birmingham, the fact that there was a change in administration in Birmingham, that the new administration had not yet taken over in their responsibilities and their duties, and that perhaps the timing of these demonstrations could be reconsidered.
On April 10th, Birmingham obtained a state court injunction ordering an end to the demonstrations. Dr. King grew discouraged, worried that the campaign here, as in Albany, would stall.
We had about 500 or 600 people in jail, but all of the money was gone and we couldn't get people out of jail. And the business community, black business community, and some of the white clergy were pressuring us to call off the demonstrations and just get out of town. We didn't know what to do. And he sat there in room 30 in the Gaston Motel, and Martin didn't say anything. And then finally, he got up and he went in the bedroom, and he came back with his blue jeans on and his jacket, and he said, look, he said, I don't know what to do. He said, I just know that something has got to change in Birmingham. I don't know whether I can raise money to get people out of jail. I do know that I can go into jail with them. And not knowing how it is going to work out, he walked out of the room and led a demonstration and went to jail. That was, I think, the beginning of his true leadership.
At this time, local white clergy were criticizing King and the campaign.
The ministers published in the newspapers a diatribe against Martin, calling him a troublemaker and saying that he was there stirring up trouble to get publicity. And he sat down and took that newspaper, and he had no paper, and he was in solitary confinement. And he started writing an answer to that one-page ad around the margins of the New York Times.
I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied.
As King sat in Birmingham jail, the demonstrations lost supporters. 8 days after his arrest, King accepted release on bond to plan the next phase of Project C. It would be the most controversial move yet.
We wanted to get the black community in Birmingham involved, and the way you get people involved is get their children involved.
They were taking the kids out of school, marching, and I thought that was unnecessary. In fact, my idea was the kids, many of them didn't know what it was all about to start with.
Most adults have bills to pay, house notes, rents, car notes, utility bills, but the young people, wherein they can think at the same level, are not at this point hooked with all those responsibilities. So a boy from high school, he get the same effect in terms of being in jail, in terms of putting pressure on the city as his father, and yet he's not, there's no economic threat on the family because the father's still on the job.
I'm on my way to freedom land.
Thursday, May 2nd was D-Day, the day the children began to march in Birmingham. At first, the groups were small. Policemen arrested them, loaded them in paddy wagons, and took them away to Birmingham jail.
I asked my mother, come and go with me. I asked my mother, come and go with me.
As the children continued to march in increasing numbers, paddy wagons became inadequate. Finally, school buses were brought in to gather the demonstrators.
Freedom land. my mother don't go, I'll go anyhow. My mother don't go, I'll go anyhow. If my mother don't go, I'll go anyhow. Oh, I'm on my way, oh Lord, freedom land. There is nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do to turn me around. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do to turn me around.
By the end of that Thursday, 700 children were taken to Birmingham jail.
I'm on my way, oh Lord, freedom land.
Friday, more than 1,000 children stayed out of school and arrived at the 16th Street Church to march. Bull Connor tried to stop the marches before they began and brought out the city's police dogs. Next, the fire department was brought in, and Bull Connor ordered water hoses turned on the demonstrators. With 100 pounds of pressure per square inch, the water hit with enough force to knock the bark off trees. As water pounded the demonstrators, David Vann was on the phone with A.G. Gaston.
And he was expressing a great deal of resentment about the king coming in and messing up the thing just when we were getting a new start. And then he said to me, he said, but Lawyer Vann said, they've turned fire hoses on a little black girl. They're rolling that little girl right in the middle of the street now. I can't talk to you no more.
It was it, and stand up on my building looking down on Bull Connor and them shooting water in the park right across from my office there in that park. I guess that's the most outstanding thing in my mind right now. I just couldn't imagine what could happen.
Bull Connor's white tank the city streets as the fire hoses stopped the demonstrators. Some hid behind the trees of Kelly England Park. Others frolicked in defiance. The conflict gained national attention, and news coverage of the event shocked the American public.
And it was a masterpiece of the use of media to explain a cause to the general public of the nation. Because in those days you had 15 minutes of national news and 15 minutes of local news. And in marching only one block, they could get enough news film to fill all of the newscasts of all of the television stations of the United States.
Photographs appeared in newspapers throughout the world, and the Birmingham story was told in many languages. The Russian newspaper Pravda ran a cartoon of police intimidating a black child. The federal government worried about America's image in other parts of the world. Governor Wallace saw it differently.
It seems that other parts of the world ought to be concerned about what we think of them instead of what they think of us. After all, we're feeding most of them, and whenever they start rejecting 25 cents of each dollar foreign aid money that we send to them, then I'll be concerned about their attitude toward us. But until they reject that 25 cents out of each dollar that Southern taxpayers pay for foreign aid to these countries, I will never be concerned about their attitude. In the first place, the average man in Africa and Asia doesn't even know where he is, much less where Alabama is.
On Saturday, the dogs and water hoses provoked angry responses from bystanders, some of them carrying weapons. Seeing the beginnings of violence, James Bevel borrowed a bullhorn from a nearby policeman.
So I took the bullhorn and said, okay, get off the streets now. We're not going to have violence. If you're not going to respect policemen, you're not going to be in the movement, and, you know. So it's strange, I guess, to them. I'm with the police talking through the bullhorn and giving orders, and everybody was obeying the orders. It was like, wow. But what was at stake was the possibility of a riot and that once in a movement, once a riot break out, you have to stop. It takes you 4 or 5 more days to get re-established, and I was trying to avoid that kind of situation.
Monday, the 5th day of the children's campaign. Comedian Dick Gregory arrived in Birmingham and marched with the young demonstrators. Like hundreds before him, he was arrested. Law enforcement officials were working overtime to keep up with the arrest.
There was no such thing as off days. Everybody working 7 days, sleeping, catnapping, and just holding fire. We all had the confirmed belief that this couldn't go on for long because he was pressing the issue to the wall.
The confrontation moved outside the park. Once again, Bull Connor summoned his firemen. With no place to run, no trees for protection, the demonstrators were hit with the full force of the water. By Monday night, 2,500 demonstrators had been arrested, over 2,000 of them children. All jails in the city and county were filled.
At one time, I had, here in this building on the 8th, 7th, and 8th floor, we had over 1,200 male, juvenile, black, on top of our regular complement of probably near 1,000. At the same time, I had 600 female juveniles in the 4-H dormitory at the fairground.
Meanwhile, the Justice Department tried to move negotiations forward.
I participated in all of, in order to try to get some kind of agreement between people that often wouldn't talk to each other at all. I don't mean that the blacks wouldn't talk to anybody, but I mean there were many whites that wouldn't talk to any blacks, and there were many more whites that wouldn't talk to certain blacks, and there were no whites, I think, except for David Vann, who would talk to Martin King.
Tuesday, May 7th, fighting broke out between blacks and whites in the downtown area. Burke Marshall and the business leaders had just left the negotiating table for lunch. The situation was fast reaching the riot proportions James Bevel had feared. The businessmen quickly returned to negotiations, ready to talk.
And so we began analyzing, now, what are your problems, what are our problems? You got to recognize, one, that we don't have a government. We've got 2 governments, neither of them can be effective. We've got to find a way to work this thing out within private sector formats.
Both sides agreed to a day of truce. A resolution was reached, but there was a last-minute hitch.
After we reached the settlement, and it looks like a molehill today to say that we're going to take down the signs, we have a 60-day cooling off period and desegregate lunch counters and begin a program of employment in downtown Birmingham with at least 3 clerks hired. I think somebody in New York asked Reverend Shuttlesworth why he would settle for just 3 clerks in downtown Birmingham, and he said, I meant 3 in every store. And the thing almost came unglued.
By that time, Reverend Shuttlesworth was so worked up that I can remember Fred cussing and David Vann crying. And it just seemed like when David Vann wanted to settle, Fred wasn't ready to settle.
Well, you must remember that there's always some disagreement when it looks as if you're not getting what you're aiming at. And there are people who want victories, social victories, to come quickly.
On Friday, May 10th, 38 days after Project C began, an agreement was reached with the business community. Reverend Shuttlesworth had been right. When the movement came to Birmingham, it won a much-needed victory, and it gained national attention. The next night, the Ku Klux Klan met outside the city, and Grand Dragon Robert Shelton gave this opinion of the Birmingham Agreement.
No business people in Birmingham or any other city has the authority to attempt any type of negotiation when it deals in governmental affairs of a municipality. Martin Luther King, in my opinion, epitaph can be written here in Birmingham.
Several hours later, a bomb exploded outside Martin Luther King's room at the Gaston Motel. King had already left Birmingham, and no one was in the room at the time. As a large crowd gathered, the Alabama State Police moved in and began beating blacks with clubs and rifles. In response, angry blacks rioted and set fire to several buildings. Over the next few weeks, the riots that began in Birmingham spread to other cities. Racial tensions gripped the country, and President Kennedy was moved to action. On June 11th, he took a stronger position than any president since Lincoln, calling civil rights a moral issue.
Now the time has come for this nation to fulfill its promise. The events in Birmingham and elsewhere have so increased the cries for equality that no city or state or legislative body can prudently choose to ignore them. The fires of frustration and discord are burning in every city, north and south. Where legal remedies are not at hand, redress is sought in the streets, in demonstrations, parades, and protests, which create tensions and threaten violence and threaten lives. Next week, I shall ask the Congress of the United States to act, to make a commitment it has not fully made in this century to the proposition that race has no place in American life or law.
Kennedy pushed for a new civil rights bill, but was troubled when the movement announced plans for a mass march on Washington. Fearing more violence, Attorney General Robert Kennedy had tried to prevent the march without success.
There will be a mass march, there is no doubt about that. And it is our purpose and it is our hope that this march will carry on in a manner that will be definitely and effectively in support of the civil rights program.
Freedom Now movement, hear me.
Now, you probably recognize a familiar face there, A. Philip Randolph. Okay, and A. Philip Randolph organized a march much earlier during the war. Okay, so he returns here and is helping to organize this 1963 march. Actually, another figure who's not mentioned here was involved, and that was Bayard Rustin. So Bayard Rustin was someone who had not received a lot of attention, had been kept in the background. He was an advisor to Martin Luther King. However, he was a homosexual black male, and he was kept out of the limelight. He was discriminated against even within the movement due to his sexual identity. But Bayard Rustin had an idea of building this March on Washington idea and build on what was proposed by A. Philip Randolph in the 1940s. So Randolph had been planning a march on Washington for jobs, but SCLC and Bayard Rustin proposed to make a comprehensive civil rights act dealing with voting, housing, public services, jobs, etc. And Kennedy had already proposed such a bill, but could not get enough senatorial support. So the march was used to compel greater support for the passing of such a bill. And here Martin Luther King at this march delivered his I Have a Dream speech in August 1963. In September, however, 4 little girls were killed in a bomb in the Birmingham church. And in November, John F. Kennedy was assassinated. This series of events was taking place. November, John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and this compelled the Congress and the new president, Lyndon Johnson, to pass the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, it banned discrimination in employment and in all public accommodations, and it withheld federal funding from those who do practice racial discrimination. Most importantly, it banned discrimination in public accommodations, and it banned discrimination by employers of labor unions, and it created an equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Now, at the same time, there were voter registration going on in Mississippi, organized by CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, and SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They had organized voter registration in the South and Mississippi and innovated the use of white students to participate. So students from the North were coming down to Mississippi to help during the summer of 1964 to register voters and do political education in Mississippi. And they believed that whites could attract media and protection as well. But workers were shot anyway. And this brought up the question of violence versus nonviolence. And the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee didn't believe in nonviolence the same way that Martin Luther King and the SCLC believed in it. This was a part of the early transition to Black Power, which hadn't been being used at the time, not quite yet. And the result was the development of freedom schools and mass voter registration of this voter campaign. So the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party wanted a seat at the Democratic Convention, and they received a compromise. Fannie Lou Hamer was a part of this movement. I have Bloody Selma up here on the screen. Voter registration activity was under attack in Selma, Alabama, and Lyndon Johnson, the new president, had refused to send troops to protect them. So Martin Luther King was called in and he was arrested, but SCLC had led a march during which Jimmy Jackson was shot and killed. King then organized a march on March 7th from Selma to Montgomery. The police beat the marchers at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. King had rescheduled the march for March 9th, but was urged by Lyndon Johnson and federal judges not to go through with it. He led the march, and when they crossed the bridge, he knelt, prayed, and turned around and marched back. Many felt betrayed by King for his decision to do this. But Lyndon Johnson, in return, signed the Voting Rights Act in 1965. 1965 Voting Rights Act outlawed things like the educational requirements for voting. It outlawed, it empowered the Attorney General to have federal registrars to enroll voters. So this the 1965 Voting Rights Act outlawed some previously existing policies that were used to limit the Black vote.
Governor Wallace was determined that the march would not take place.
Such action would not be allowed on the part of any other group of citizens or non-citizens of the state of Alabama, and will not be allowed in this instance. The government must proceed in an orderly manner, and lawful and law-abiding citizens must transact their business with the government in such a manner. There will be no march between Selma, Alabama, and Montgomery, and I have so instructed the Department of Public Safety.
Despite the governor's ban, 600 people gathered at Brown Chapel AME Church on Sunday, March 7th, to begin the march to Montgomery. Dr. King was preaching in Atlanta. Hosea Williams and John Lewis led the march. Lewis chose to march even though his organization, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, opposed SCLC's strategy and decided not to take part. Surprisingly, as they walked through the center of town, there were no police in sight. The route out of Selma crossed over the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
Cheyenne and I went to the Edmund Pettus Bridge. There, where I turned around and left Cheyenne. Simply because I'm telling you, I was afraid.
Waiting on the other side were Alabama state troopers, under orders from Governor Wallace to stop the marchers. Clark's posse was on the sidelines.
It'll be detrimental to your safety to continue this march, and I'm saying that this is an unlawful assembly. You have to disperse. You are ordered to disperse, go home, or go to your church. This march will not continue. Is that clear to you? I've got nothing further to say to you.
All I could remember was outbursts of tear gas. And I saw people being beaten, and I began to just try to run home as fast as I could. And as I began to run home, I saw horses behind me, and I will never forget, a freedom fighter picked me up, Hosea Williams. And I told him to put me down. He wasn't running fast enough. And I ran, and I ran, and I ran.
We were about 2 blocks away from the bridge, and we went back to try to help people back. But the police were riding along on horseback, beating people. And the tear gas was so thick you couldn't get to where people were in need of help. And so we really had to turn the church into a hospital just to get people back to their senses. And it was a horrible 2 or 3 hours.
Shock gave way to anger. There was talk of retaliation.
There were people who came back to the church and started talking about going to get their guns. You had to talk them down. And you had to talk them down by simply asking the question, what kind of gun you got? 32, 38? How's that going to hold up against the automatic rifles and 10-gauge shotguns that they've got? And how many you got? There are at least 200, shotguns out there with buckshot in them. You ever see buckshot? You ever see what buckshot does to a deer? And most of them had. And you make people think about the specifics of violence, and then they realize how suicidal and nonsensical it is.
The day after Bloody Sunday, Governor Wallace reprimanded law enforcement officers for the scene on the bridge.
It was something that happened that enraged me, because I didn't intend for it to happen that way. But I didn't want them to get beyond that point where there were some people that told me there might be some violence.
Sunday night, the television networks broke into regular programming to show these scenes to a national audience. ABC interrupted its primetime movie, Judgment at Nuremberg, a film about Nazi war crimes.
When that beating happened at the foot of the bridge, it looked like a war. That went all over the country. And then the wrath of the nation came down on us.
Governor Wallace had made clear his intention to prevent this march on the grounds of public safety and danger on the highways. And while we knew there would be a confrontation, state and local law enforcement officials were prepared for major disorder. We had no reason to believe that local law enforcement officials would set upon nonviolent and peaceful citizens in the way in which they did. On prior occasions, this has not occurred.
Shame on you, George Wallace, for the wet ropes that bruise the muscles, for the bullwhips that cut the flesh, for the clubs that broke the bones, and for the tear gas that seared the eyes and the nose and the nostrils and the lungs and choked people into insensibility. This is not the American way.
When this happened at Selma, and I saw it on television, to me it expanded beyond civil rights, beyond whether you vote or where you sit in a restaurant or in a cafe or on planes or trains or buses. It became a matter of human life, and it became an issue that transcended any of those we're voting on, became bigger than that.
After the beating on the bridge, we immediately sent out a call for our friends. We didn't think we could count on police protection. People said we should send in the National Guard. We didn't think that they would send in the National Guard to protect black people. And so we sent out a call to people of goodwill.
From all over the country, people came to Selma, among them 450 white clergymen.
Here, a group of people, black and white, saying to us, we are here to share with the people of Selma in this struggle for the right to vote. We have seen on the television screen the violence that took place, and we're here to share with you. And you could feel a change in the atmosphere, a spirit of inspiration, motivation, and seemingly hope coming back into the eyes and into the minds of these people, and then renewed commitment to the nonviolent method.
They planned to march on Tuesday, but President Johnson wanted them to wait until they could be sure there would be no violence. In Montgomery, another Johnson, federal Judge Frank Johnson, banned the march pending a hearing. Dr. King had never violated a federal order, but there was increasing pressure to march, especially from SNCC.
My name is James Foreman. I'm the Executive Secretary of Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee.
The SCLC ministers left the decision about marching to King. The young members of SNCC, angered by Sunday's attack, wanted to be sure King wouldn't back down.
You know, federal injunctions and court injunctions have been handed down in the past, and it's really people here have to make up their minds and make certain decisions themselves about what it is that they want to do.
There was private disagreement, but public unity.
Well, there's no disagreement between SNCC and SCLC, and that's not, that's not an issue here.
The announcement was made to the people in the audience that the march that Tuesday would go forward, all right? But some of us also knew that Dr. King had told, Judge Johnson, that he was going to call off the march. So we had a meeting from about 11 o'clock to 5 o'clock that morning where we were trying to lay out to him the necessity to keep his word to the people that the march would go forward and that it would not be called off.
We have no alternative but to keep moving with determination. We've gone too far now to turn back. And in a real sense, we are moving and we cannot afford to stop because Alabama and because our nation has a date with destiny.
Tuesday, March 9th. 2,000 marchers set out to cross the Pettus Bridge. This time, there were politicians, labor and church leaders, members of SNCC, the widow of a U.S. senator, and a few Southern whites. They were side by side with those who had been beaten 2 days earlier.
You are ordered to stop. Stand where you are. This march will not continue.
The marchers asked to kneel and pray.
Because we know that America was founded on the principles that all men are created equal. Not just white men, but all men. We don't have much money, but we do have our bodies. And we lay them on the altar for thee and for our freedom today.
Then Dr. King turned the marchers around and walked back across the bridge. Some expressed relief, others shock.
All of a sudden, I realized that the people in front were turning around and coming back. And I was aghast. What is going on? Are we not going to go through with this confrontation? What's happening?
The truth of it was that there was nothing much else to do. We'd been ordered by a judge not to go any further. If we had run into that police line, they would have beaten us up with court approval.
SNCC members would call the turnaround a sellout, worsening the split between them and SCLC. For others, there was a sense of confusion.
We waited to hear Dr. King's explanation of why this had been. We never fully understood. But what we did understand is saying, as many of you as can, could you stay a few more days? Could you remain? Well, most of us had come without even a toothbrush because we thought it was a one-day event. But nevertheless, a number of us decided to stay, I among them.
Later that evening, Reverend Miller, along with ministers Clark Olson and James Reeb, were returning from dinner. Unfamiliar with the town, they took a wrong turn past the Silver Moon Cafe.
And as we started walking from across the street, there appeared 4 or 5 white men. And they yelled at us, "Hey, you niggers." And we did not look across at them, but we just sort of quickened our pace. We didn't run, but continued walking in the same direction. And they apparently came across the street from our left and behind us. And one of them was carrying a club. And Clark said he turned around and saw the club just as it was swung. And Jim Reeb, being closest to the curb, caught the full impact of that blow.
James Reeb died 2 days later.
Ain't you got a right? 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 Ain't you got a right to the tree of life?
News of the attack provoked a national outcry. In many cities, demonstrators protested the violence in Selma.
Ain't you got a right? Ain't you got a right? Ain't you got a right to the tree of life?
Some blacks were angry that the death of a white minister stirred a nation that had ignored the death of Jimmy Lee Jackson.
What it seemed to me is that the movement itself is playing into the hands of racism. Because what you want is a nation to be upset when anybody is killed, and especially when one of us is killed. You understand? So it just played into the hands of racism, and it's almost like, you know, for this to be recognized, a white person must be killed. Well, what are you saying?
When the police barricaded the area around Brown Chapel, SNCC withdrew from the Selma campaign in frustration. The barricades were to keep hostile whites out, the protesters in. One group, led by Jimmy Webb, broke free of the barricades. They were stopped by Clark's men.
I can't follow you, and I'm not going to follow you and give you personal protection. And I'm telling you, for your own benefit, you had better turn around and get out of this air. You're not going to the courthouse in a group under the conditions that you come here, and I'll assure you that.
All we would like to do, sir, is to go to the
Courthouse is closed. There's no business there.
We don't want to go in the courthouse. All we want to do is go to the lawn of the courthouse, kneel in prayer, and we'll gladly return.
You take your prayers back to your church. That's a proper place to pray.
Sir,
I'm sure that God will hear your prayer just as well down there as it will up here, but you're not going on this courthouse alone.
Sir, whenever there are men who are in sinful conditions, prayer should be uttered wherever they are.
Well, why don't you pray where you are? Go back down there and pray. You think you're lily white? You think you're not sinful?
No.
Well, then go back to your church and pray.
Well, sir, can we pray together, you and I?
You do your praying. I do mine, big boy. You don't pray for me. I don't want you to pray for me.
Well, will you pray for us?
Because I don't think your prayers get above your head.
Well, will you pray for us?
No, I'm not going to pray for you. I'll tend to my business, you tend to yours. Now, you better move these people out of here.
Sir,
we're trying to protect you.
Sir,
I don't have to love anybody I don't want to love.
Sir,
you do your own loving. You love your little niggas. I love who I please.
Do you believe in equal justice for all?
I believe in justice.
Do you believe in equal justice?
I don't believe in equal nothing. There's no two people in this world alike, and they are not equal on any terms or conditions. There's no two peas in the world alike. No two pieces of money nor nothing else.
And sir, are you saying that if I have a quarter and I'm black and you have a quarter and you white, then my quarter isn't as worth as much as your quarter?
That's your quarter. I'll decide,
my quarter is worth?
I'll decide what my quarter is worth. You use yours and I'll use mine. You buy you a catfish sandwich and yours. I have nothing else to say.
What's the deal here now? You people in this small group want to turn and walk on back to the group. The rest of the group's down there waiting on you.
We have your protection.
We'll do everything we can. Just go on back down there. You didn't have it coming up here.
Plans for the march to Montgomery remained at a standstill pending a federal court decision. Now protecting the marchers became an issue for both President Johnson and Governor Wallace.
We got to report how much it would take to guarantee absolute protection from everyone, and we didn't have the resources. So I called on President Johnson on Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution to send us troops to help us maintain order.
Wallace met with President Johnson in Washington on March 13th.
What happened in the meeting was that the president totally snowed him. Governor Wallace didn't quite grovel, but he was so pliant by the end of the 2 hours, with President Johnson putting his arm around him and squeezing him and telling him it's a moment of history, and how do we want to be remembered in history? Do we want to be remembered as petty little men, or do we want to be remembered as great figures that faced up to our moments of crisis and that kind of thing? And then he led Governor Wallace out in the hopes that Governor Wallace, who was by that time like a rubber band, would give a press statement that confirmed his determination to protect the marchers at Selma, comply with the court order from Judge Johnson, and act like a responsible governor.
Well, all I can say is that I am very hopeful that we can have a solution to the problems that confront us in this regard, and that I did request, I did make some suggestions, and I hope that we can have a cessation sometime of the demonstrations, although I recognize the right to peacefully assemble, but I do think there are limitations. But that's all.
Can you tell us, Governor, what the
Governor Wallace still refused to pay for protecting the marchers. President Johnson, sensing the mood of the country, addressed Congress on national television.
What happened in Selma is part of a far larger movement which reaches into every section and state of America. It is
8 days after Bloody Sunday, 4 days after Reeb's death, the president asked for a comprehensive voting rights bill and astonished the nation by using the words of the movement.
Their cause must be our cause too. Because it's not just Negroes, but really it's all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice. And we shall overcome.
Lyndon Johnson came on, the late president, and said, "We shall overcome." And it's just like, you'd stuck a dagger in your heart or something like that. I mean, you know, what's this guy doing? And, you know, you had respect for your country. The South's very patriotic, but it just destroyed everything you'd been allegedly fighting for.
We were all sitting around together, and Martin was sitting in a chair looking toward the TV set. And when LBJ said, "And we shall overcome," we all cheered, and I looked over toward Martin, and Martin was very quietly sitting in the chair, and a tear ran down his cheek. It was a victory like none other. It was an affirmation of the movement.
But SNCC didn't see any victory. In Montgomery, where they had moved operations, they were being beaten by Alabama police as they tried to confront Governor Wallace.
Go ahead. Oh.
There's only one man in this country that can stop George Wallace and those posses. We can present thousands and thousands of bodies in the streets if we want to. And we can have all of the soul force and the moral commitment around this world. But a lot of these problems will not be solved until that shaggably over place called the White House begins to shake and gets on the phone and says, "Now listen, George, we coming down there and throw you in jail if you don't stop that mess." That's the only way it's going to be stopped.
We will pick up in the next video with Malcolm X.